Welcome to The Christian Atheist, episode number 33, Hegel the Ugly, part 3. We have built a progressive case that Hegel opened the door, a Pandora's box, really, to the eclipse of truth and reality by replacing transcendence, being, with an immanent process, the dialectic. It is Hegel's dialectical logic that is his most enduring legacy. Our manner of thinking, as opposed to what it is we think about, tends to slip beneath conscious awareness. In this way, Hegel has ceased to be present to the mind of Western consciousness, while becoming pervasive. I assert that we are all unconscious Hegelians today, that it takes a conscious effort to see the world in any other way. That open door initiated a slippery slope to an idealism that Hegel himself would have denied, one that Kant warned against strenuously: empirical idealism. The idea that human subjectivity does not encounter, but creates reality. My claim here is that Western philosophical thought following Hegel has progressively become more and more prescriptive, more and more like an empirical idealism, both metaphysically and ethically. This is where Hegel's logic takes us when it is untethered, 1, from transcendence, and 2, from description, from carving nature at her joints. This prescriptive turn was initiated by Marx, but as we progressively unfold Hegel's logic over the rest of the 20th century and into the 21st, especially with the left's genetic tendency to break down barriers and categories, we get an ever-increasing prescriptive loss of truth, unity, and reality. That is, we get postmodernism. Quote, "The postmodern project is overwhelmingly prescriptive rather than descriptive. An academic theory that prioritizes what it believes ought to be true over the aim of describing what is, has ceased to search for knowledge because it believes it has the truth. That is, it has become a system of faith, and its scholarship has become a sort of theology. This is what we see in social justice scholarship. Declarations of ought have replaced the search for what is." From Cynical Theories by Lindsay and Pluckrose. What I object to most strenuously in postmodern thought and practice is that, like the Marxists and critical theorists before them, they are strategically untethered from reality and truth. Their critical assessments of our social world, as befits a theology, are apocalyptic, even dystopian. Their moral caricatures, like most good lies, start with truths, with valid judgments, but quickly morph into monstrous misrepresentations. Quite literally, as prescriptivists, nothing real constrains them, except their purpose. They build their meta-narrative, the one we're not supposed to notice since they're opposed to meta-narratives. They build their meta-narrative on half-truths and lies, bending and distorting reality, justified by their moral condemnation of that reality. That is, as Hegelians, they are ethical consequentialists to their core. Their end justifies whatever means are necessary. There is a self-righteousness and certitude in their judgments, born of godlike pretensions to transcendent insight. To take one important example of this, Martin Luther King had a dream, quote, that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. A dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. A dream that one day down in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. End quote. In the real world, that dream became reality as much as any human dream ever can. Yet, if we believe the postmodern academic and media complex of today, we are even more racist than the society Martin Luther King confronted. How, in the face of the immense progress we've made on race in the West, can any honest person see racism today as more virulent than ever before? Only through a critical lens that does not view reality, but creates it. This critical reality, beginning with Marx, grew increasingly more prescriptive as the historical facts of the 20th century steadily undermined any possible empirical, real-world evidence for the Marxist faith. One can easily see why the socialist left might hate reality, resent it, seek to overturn it, to rewrite it. Reality has not been kind to the Marxist faith. I am here far from indicting the left as a whole. For a tendency to attack and question the status quo, to support the dispossessed, to demand reform of systems that have not well served human interests and aspirations, is not only necessary for any functional society, but noble and good. The law had the prophets, Athens its gadfly, and Jesus was no friend to establishment. Where, then, does the problem lie? It is neither on the left nor on the right, both of which are in themselves imbalanced, prone to extremism, to issue in totalitarian dogma. As tendencies, not extremes, both left and right are vital to the life of any healthy society. It is instead Nietzsche who correctly diagnoses the illness. Quote, "The very principle of resentment, becoming creative and giving birth to values, a resentment experienced by creatures who, deprived as they are of the proper outlet of action, are forced to find their compensation in an imaginary revenge. The resentful man is neither sincere, nor naive, nor honest and candid with himself. His soul squints. His mind loves hidden crannies, tortuous paths, and back doors. Everything secret appeals to him as his world." From the Genealogy of Morals. Resentment is the characteristic attitude of the victim. Those who view themselves as helplessly oppressed by forces they are powerless to overcome, who turn their very oppression into a virtue, who will hold to their own goodness, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of their responsibility, their complicity in their situation, in the bad outcomes of their choices. Once again quoting Nietzsche, "Imagine the enemy as the resentful man conceives him, the evil enemy, the evil one. And indeed, that is the root idea from which he now evolves as a contrasting and corresponding figure, a good one, himself. Let the question be asked, who is really evil according to the meaning of the morality of resentment? In all sternness, let it be answered thus: just the good man of the other morality, just the aristocrat, the powerful one, the one who rules, but who is distorted by the venomous eye of resentfulness into a new color, a new signification, a new appearance. Also from the genealogy of morals. Hitler's demonization of the Jews, and today's Palestinian and contemporary leftist views of Israel fit this bill quite well. Right-wing resentment usually takes a very explicit nationalistic or racial scapegoating of this resentment, whereas the left gravitates to a far more subtle, even ethical, conceptual scapegoating. But in either case, what is always at fault is reality itself, the unfair existing structures or groups upon which the victim or theorist places blame for the shipwreck of their experience. At least part of the failure here is the result of Hegel's movement from individualism to collectivism. If responsibility and freedom are not the province of the individual, and individuals are merely the avatars of the collective forces that create and sustain them, then it is always the case that we are, as individuals, the unwitting victims of forces greater than ourselves. It is, however, basic psychology that recognizing our individual freedom is empowering and allows us to rise above even seemingly insurmountable challenges. To wallow in the collective, however, is to choose resentment. This is not to say that collective forces do not exist, or that they are not powerful, even profoundly influential in individual life and thought. Like all postmodern theses, it is not that they have it entirely wrong, but that they have radicalized a truth. Taken an Aristotelian virtue and pushed it to its corresponding vice. This tendency to push a virtue to a vice addresses one of the most important questions posed by Jordan Peterson. How do we know when the left has gone too far? It is easy to draw a line around the ideological excesses of the right, as they start in error, in moral bankruptcy, claiming radical superiority for a race or a culture. Everyone recoils at the Nazi or the fascist in today's world, and rightly so. Yet the left is almost never called until millions die. And even then, excuses are made and accepted. Why? The right draws boundaries and the left attacks them. The right glories in tradition and structure, while the left sees immorality and threat in structure, finding value and possibility in opening up what is closed. The left, then, begins on an intuitively moral footing, opening that which is closed. And as such, it is difficult to oppose by intuition or argument. Nearly universal agreement has been achieved that racism is wrong. So when the left couches nearly all it does as anti-racist, how can a person of goodwill and moral sentiment oppose it? This is the advantage of an intellectual and social system, postmodernism, that can prescribe both its target, and its own moral rectitude by preforming each to maximize its desired end without concern for any established boundaries, moral or otherwise, since all boundaries, even logic itself, it asserts, are collective constructions of oppression. The prescriptive Hegelian tradition pulls this trick again and again. For instance, skepticism is one of man's greatest defenses against error. It is a great asset, unless it becomes radical, as in postmodern practice, in which it destroys the very notion of error itself, of right and wrong, of truth. Quote, Postmodernism didn't invent skepticism. It perverted it into a corrosive cynicism. Each of the postmodern principles and themes has a kernel of truth and points to a problem that needs to be dealt with, but none of these problems are effectively addressed by postmodernism. It is wise to be skeptical of rigid categories and boundaries. They should be constantly tested, prodded, pushed, and moved where warranted. Radical skepticism, which has no method of improving the accuracy of the categories, but simply distrusts categories on principle, is profoundly unhelpful, and reality remains unaffected by it. Also from Cynical Theories by Pluckrose and Lindsay. Postmodern criticisms, almost all, have as their point of origin real problems. And much of its theoretical apparatus stands on truths. But both the problems and the truths have been stretched, mangled, disfigured, and mischaracterized to unrecognizable extremes in service of their prescriptive ends. This is no accident. The neo-Marxists of the Frankfurt School understood that chaos served their interests, that the existing traditions and structures of the Western world stood in the way of the socialist revolution. Thus, they instituted the long march through the institutions. Culture, they reasoned, was the reason the Marxist revolution has not come. The proletariat was simply too stupid, too anesthetized by the capitalist marketplace and its consumerism, by the blandishments of religion, the comforts of the family, the educational and legal systems that, from their view, give the appearance of justice and prosperity. The present peace and future hope of the oppressed masses that forever dashed the class-conscious resentment required to initiate the socialist revolution. How best to destroy those institutions and the liberal state which they sustain. Postmodernism serves this purpose as well as any philosophical movement ever could. What better way to undermine all these institutions at once than to undermine truth itself? If truth is relative, then one belief system is no better than any other, and anything goes. And if all human institutions are just power structures designed to oppress those out of power, then again, anything goes in response to them. Power, in any form, is justified to achieve one's own ends, and most especially when those ends are so clearly absolutely good, right? And here we arrive at the crux of the matter. Starting with Hegel's denial of transcendence, his absolute idealism and its reliance on structure over being, of collectivism over individualism, and then the progressive abandonment of descriptivism by the Marxists in favor of a prescriptivism that through its resentment creates the world it criticizes. thus arrogating to itself the right to remake it, morally constrained only by the effectiveness of its means. And we get a world of groups in constant and irreconcilable conflict, each maintaining its own absolute value, without hope of neutral arbitration, that is, of transcendence. While the postmodern theorists say that there is no way of morally deciding between value systems, that is, by creating a theoretical and radical moral relativism, nevertheless, they, like all human beings, live as if their ultimate value is true in the ultimate sense. When they sit in Hegel's position, God's seat, they exercise absolute authority. The logic is almost inescapable once the Hegelian position is accepted. There is nothing really new in postmodern thought. As Pluckrose and Lindsay assert, quote, very little of what the postmodernists and their academic and activist descendants put forth is original, end quote. But if not new, it is certainly unprecedented in its influence in today's world, in its ability to destroy what has taken millennia to achieve. Like the sophists of Plato's day, the enemies of truth must be confronted, and truth must win. If this is the first episode of The Christian Atheist you viewed, please subscribe below. Next episode, we will wrap up our series on the battle of the philosophical titans, Kant versus Hegel. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all three in this post.